Most of you aren't subscribed. Make sure to subscribe, as it helps out the channel. Without further ado, in the dead of night, Yuji along with his companions make their way towards the directions of the blue dragon, who's floating above a forest. Communicating with his slimes, he orders all but one to fall back, wanting to test his abilities, especially against a monstrous creature. Searching through his skills, he wonders how strong his dragon's breath skill will be, transferring the spell to the slime, and having the slime fire at the hovering blue dragon. Confirming that the spell landed, when the smoke clears, Yuji is shocked to see that the spell didn't even leave a mark. Checking the status of the dragon, Yuji is confused as he knows the blue dragon is resistant to all spell types, except fire and holy magic. Just then the blue dragon begins storing up energy, firing off several beams that cut through the forest, making their way to Yuji's position. Luckily, Yuji had projected a barrier just in time, noting that the dragon had stopped attacking and had gotten bigger. Looking around, Yuji deduces that the dragon is drawing magical energy from the forest every time it destroys the forest. Knowing that the dragon will grow stronger and stronger with every passing second, Yuji unveils the dagger of Kethis, reasoning that he could channel his dragon's breath spell into the tip of the dagger, hoping that a concentrated attack will do some damage. Ordering his companions to follow after him, Yuji dashes forward, making his way to the dragon's location. As they jump off a cliff to make their way into the forest, Yuji spots the blue dragon charging up a shot, reacting just in time with a barrier, but the dragon's beam begins creeping through Yuji's barrier, but luckily the barrier holds out. Getting closer and closer, the blue dragon once again fires a beam, but this time, Yuji grabs one of his slimes, tossing it at the dragon, and transferring his barrier spell to the slime. Whilst the dragon is occupied with breaking the slime's barrier, Yuji finally makes it beneath the dragon's location, in the sky, calculating that the dragon is about 50 meters in the air. Searching for certain skills, Yuji casts Jump Boost, whilst also creating several platforms, making his way above the dragon. When the dragon attempts to shoot down Yuji, he has one of his slimes fire a projectile to distract it, allowing Yuji to impale the blue dragon's eye with his dagger, only to channel his dragon's breath into the tip of the dagger. As the dagger ruptures the dragon's eye, the impact from the spell sends the dragon flying, making Yuji turn his back. But suddenly, Yuji is hit by the dragon's tail, barely able to erect his barrier, as the dragon is still alive, only missing its one eye. Still alive, Yuji checks his stats, seeing that his magical power is in the negative, and his HP is below half. Just then, the dragon fires its beam at Yuji, prompting him to defend with his barrier, but knowing that his barrier will eventually break, he begins searching for a way to get close to the dragon. Stumbling upon a divine strike spell, Yuji reasons that he will have to take the dragon out of the air, to increase his chances of getting close, so he focuses his energy on keeping up his barrier, long enough for the blue dragon to finish its beam attack. Right on cue, Yuji drops his barrier, casting the divine strike skill, which conjures a beam of light in from the skies, plucking the dragon from the air and temporarily paralyzing it. Calling for his wolf, Yuji rides in close, grabbing a hold of his dagger, stabbing and dragging it across the dragon's neck, all whilst infusing his blade with his dragon's breath spell. With the blue dragon officially dead, Yuji notes how tough the battle was, but nonetheless he begins heading back to the village, leaving behind the dragon's corpse. The next morning, Yuji is called by Rayard, who reports that the skies have surprisingly cleared up, and that Father Stale has found out that someone had slayed the blue dragon. Additionally, Father Stale has left town without a word, which surprises Yuji, but before Yuji can ask further, Rayard leaves, thanking Yuji for his work, hinting at the fact that he knows Yuji was the one that slayed the blue dragon. Grabbing some breakfast, Yuji chats with Tina and Lisa, who are sad that they don't get to see the blue dragon for themselves. Wondering what Yuji will do now, the girls learn that Yuji plans on heading to another town, which makes them suggest he head to the town of Ricardo, a place with lots of delicious foods. As he bids farewell to the girls, he leaves some slimes with them, making his way to this new destination. Passing through a forest, Yuji is suddenly contacted by his dryad friend, telling Yuji that there is an emergency. Immediately rushing to the dryad's location, Yuji asks about the issue, but learns that the death of the blue dragon has caused several types of mushrooms to grow in the forest, which the dryad needs Yuji's help to gather them. Knowing that he's been called to help with something pointless, Yuji realizes that the red mushrooms can be used to restore health points, and the blue mushrooms can be used to help restore a user's mana instantly, back to what it was 10 minutes prior. Calling for his slimes to gather the mushrooms, Yuji asks that the dryad begin making some blue and red potions, but when the dryad begins extracting a liquid from the mushrooms, the dryad realizes that the color of the liquid is not matching the color of the mushroom. Seeing as the mushrooms are too potent with magical energy, the dryad asks for Yuji to fetch some pure water, prompting him to begin distilling some dirty water, where he'll eventually get some clean water. Seeing Yuji so reliable, the dryad thinks back to when they first met, where Yuji had found her unconscious in a tree, in the middle of a desolate forest. Flashing back, Yuji had used one of his slimes to replenish the dryad's magical power, waking her up and learning that the dryad had her magic drained via a mysterious stone. Helping her search for the stone, Yuji had tried to destroy the stone, but instead mysterious monsters began pouring out of the stone. Reacting quickly, Yuji traps the monsters in one of his barriers, casting a fire spell to incinerate all the monsters emerging from the stone. With the stone now destroyed, the dryad is able to give life to the desolate forest, thanking Yuji, as he saved her life. Seeing liquid the dryad had extracted, Yuji is reminded of the red mysterious stones, finding out that the red stones he's been encountering are all infused with Dragon's Grace. Dragon's Grace is the essence of deceased dragons, and is neither considered good or evil, as it really depends on how it's used, but it has the ability to decimate an entire forest. As water finishes distilling, Yuji is given several potions, as thanks for his help. Parting ways with the dryad, Yuji continues to the town of Ricardo, stumbling into a mist that makes it hard to see. Relying on his wolf's sense of smell, Yuji and his companions head in the direction of some humans that the wolf smells, stumbling upon a village in the mist. Walking through town, Yuji notes the abundance of villagers, weirded out when he sees all of them smiling and staring at him. Passing several homes, Yuji is suddenly greeted by the head of the village, asking if he can be of any service. When Yuji reveals that he's passing by, the head of the village offers for Yuji to stay until the mist clears, taking him to a house, and feeding him some food. Noting the weird atmosphere, Yuji refuses to eat the food offered, but on top of that, when he sees all the townspeople spying on them through a window, Yuji reasons that it is best to leave. Before he leaves, he learns the name of the village is Messiah's. As Yuji leaves Messiah's, we cut to the head of the town, speaking to a mysterious person through an orb, stating that they will be extracting the Dragon's Grace from the Delight Cannon tomorrow. Finally seeing a clearing, Yuji exits the mist, but is thrown off, as it's now snowing. Begrudgingly trudging through the snow, Yuji realizes that his companions are quite uncomfortable with the cold weather, so Yuji looks for a spell to help out, casting a cold-resistant spell on everyone. As Yuji finally makes it to Ricardo's gates, he's greeted by a guard, who is surprised to have a visitor, especially due to the weather. On top of that, the guard tells Yuji that the snow had only started 10 days ago, out of nowhere, even claiming some of the villagers' lives. Asking about Yuji's reason for wanting to enter Ricardo, Yuji proudly states that he's here for the food, he's heard good things off. Walking through town, Yuji notes the quiet and empty streets, reasoning that because the snow started 10 days ago, most villagers would have probably not had prepared for it. Heading to the Tiger's Flame Tavern, which was suggested by the guard to have amazing food, Yuji apologizes for the intrusion, seeing that the owner is packing things up. Apologizing, the owner states that she won't be able to serve Yuji anytime soon, as their establishment is completely out of firewood, having used it all for heating. Looking around the room, Yuji is able to see that the establishment is quite refined, motivating him to search for a solution. Apparently, the owner can't accept just any wood, as genuine firewood must be kept dry and aged for at least a year. Hearing this, Yuji heads to a nearby forest, asking if his companions have any ideas to get this dry-aged firewood, but they all don't have a clue. Thinking for a bit, Yuji summons an ordinary axe, enchanting it with physical boost, only to swing it in the direction of the forest, taking down a row of trees in a second. Cutting up the trees, and stacking them up, Yuji searches for a way to remove moisture from the wood, realizing that he can use his slimes to suck out the moisture. With some slimes eating up any moisture in the wood, Yuji has the slimes store the firewood, heading back to the tavern to tell the owner the good news. Given a piece of firewood, the owner rushes to get a second opinion on Yuji's firewood, but sadly the wood is too dry. Hearing this, Yuji simply has his slime moisturize the firewood a bit, impressing the cook, as the firewood is now optimal for burning. Seeing the chef and owner grateful for the single piece of wood, Yuji gives them the massive pile of wood he had just obtained, ordering his slimes to adjust the moisture in the wood, so it's perfect for burning. Thankful for the valuable wood, the chef immediately begins cooking something special for Yuji, presenting him with a beautiful chunk of meat with vegetables. With a single bite, Yuji is sent to heaven, noting how the flavors complement one another when fused with the special sauce. Seeing Yuji appreciate his cooking, the chef reveals that his best dish is a special stew, but it may take some time to make. Believing that this chef will surprise him, Yuji states that he'll be back soon to taste his stew, but before Yuji leaves, he learns that the entire town is also in need of firewood. Wanting to help out, Yuji heads to this town's guild, seeing if there are any quests for firewood. Upon spotting some, Yuji registers himself as an adventurer in town only to be told by the receptionist that he needs to head to the East Gate, where the instructor Wadka will teach Yuji about the instructions and requirements for the firewood. Meeting up with Wadka, Wadka is happy to teach Yuji, as he's in need of more people to help cut wood. Wadka states that even with all the manpower they have currently, the amount of wood they cut is not enough to sustain their village, along with nearby villages. Hearing this, Yuji asks if the village of Messiahs is doing okay, but Wadka gives Yuji a strange look, as it's well known the village of Messiahs has been abandoned for years. Changing topics, Wadka asks if Yuji has any experience cutting wood, asking Yuji to demonstrate what he knows. Getting to work, Yuji takes out his axe, immediately cutting down multiple trees with a single swing. As Wadka and other cutters watch in awe at Yuji's skills, Yuji nonchalantly cuts the trees into perfect pieces of firewood, having his slimes absorb the moisture, storing the wood in the slimes, only to rinse and repeat. As Wadka and Yuji return to guild, Wadka voices how impressed he is with Yuji's skills, prompting the receptionist to mention that Yuji reminds her of the legend involving a beastmaster, who used slimes just like Yuji to perform amazing acts. Having finished filling the guild with firewood, Yuji asks for a place to unload the rest, leaving everyone speechless, as he takes out 3 days' worth of firewood. Asking if there are more quests that involve gathering firewood, Yuji immediately gets to work, cutting down more trees, and having his companions create and transport the firewood into town. With a single day spent cutting wood, Yuji returns to the cook, finally being served the cook's famous stew, but for the companions, they are given an alternative of delicious meat and vegetables. As Yuji and his companions dig into a well-earned meal, they all get an out-of-body experience, stunned at the food's intricate flavors that are able to create such a sensation. Finishing up the meal, Yuji wonders if the chef has any other amazing dishes, learning that the village's crops have been terrorized recently by boars, making the chef's dishes not as perfect as he wanted. Hearing this, Yuji sends his companions to scout the crop fields, having some stand guard around the field's perimeters, and the rest begins hunting for the boars. Luckily, Yuji's slimes run into one, not too soon after, easily slaying the boar with Yuji's transferred magic. As the slimes look around the forest, they easily begin racking up boar kills, totaling 50, but they stop, reporting that they've discovered a mysterious orb. Personally investigating the orb with the help of the dryad, Yuji notices that the orb is absorbing his mana, deducing that the orb must be made with dragon's grace. Asking the dryad if there is something strange with the area, the dryad states that the area they are currently in is quite low in magic, which could explain the abnormal weather conditions, as low mana places are cold, and dense mana places are quite hot. Wondering if these orbs could occur naturally, Yuji finds out that these orbs can only be man-made, which makes sense, as all the other red crystals they've encountered so far have been man-made, and were also infused with dragon's grace. Dispelling and destroying the orb before them, Yuji orders his slimes to search for similar orbs, eventually locating around 100 plus orbs, scattered all across the forest. Taking out a map, Yuji begins plotting down the locations of each orb found in the forest, which forms a mysterious circle. Guessing that something may be happening at the center of this circle, the gang make their way towards the center of the circle, but upon reaching the spot, Yuji immediately sees something strange with how the terrain is. Knowing that the trees in the center of the circle are concealing something, Yuji asks that all his slimes leave the area, asking for his wolf to help gather them. Asking for permission to destroy this area of the forest, the dryad reluctantly agrees, as she has full faith in whatever Yuji is doing. Blasting the forest with his dragon's breath, Yuji creates a massive crater where the forest used to be, but as the smoke clears, they all spot a secret entrance, leading deeper into the ground. Knowing that this may be the cause of the unusual weather, Yuji and his companions wonder if they should even mess with whatever twisted things are happening below. Breaking open the hatch, Yuji and his companions all stare down the deep tunnel, unable to see the end of it, but nonetheless Yuji makes his way down the tunnel's ladder, entering a labyrinth. Reaching the bottom of the ladder, Yuji wonders where he should begin, as there are so many different paths and doors, so he sends his slimes to investigate first. In the meantime, Yuji's wolf and the dryad remain on the surface, checking if Yuji made it down safely, which he confirms, but asks the dryad to return to the forest, as coming down here is not safe for her. Suddenly, Yuji is called by his slimes to enter a room, where he spots a massive machine, along with various other intricate parts. Wondering who could have manufactured such a complex machine, Yuji moves deeper into this facility, spotting various machines seemingly constructing the mysterious red crystals that he's been encountering. Just then, Yuji hears two voices, hiding behind some machines, only to see two men rushing over to check on the construction of the crystals. But when they realize that the crystals aren't being properly manufactured, the men voice that they should report to a person, by the name of Javier, running off. Now with a name, Yuji moves deeper into the underground labyrinth, stumbling upon a door that leads down a singular hallway. Knowing that he should keep his guard up, his slimes suddenly sprint down the hallway, which gives Yuji the idea to retreat for now, casting a stealth spell on the slimes, allowing his slimes to search the labyrinth first. Returning to the surface, Yuji makes his way through the forest following the slimes, but at the same time, monitors his slimes' positions underground. Suddenly one of Yuji's slimes reports that they've found the two men, prompting Yuji to have the slimes follow the men. As the slimes squeeze through various doors to tail the men, they eventually lose sight of the men, reaching a metal door and unable to find any cracks to squeeze through. Looking up, the slimes spot two metal levers, one on each side of the door, explaining why there were two men and not one. Ordered to pull the levers, the slimes work together to simultaneously pull the levers, finally opening the metal door, allowing all the slimes to pass through. In the meantime, Yuji continues following the slimes from the surface, noting how the slimes are progressing through the labyrinth quite quickly, and that the labyrinth is quite huge. After a while, the slimes reach another dead end, spotting a ladder, which they all climb. Right as the slimes reach the surface, Yuji also notices where the slimes are heading, as it's revealed to be the mist town of Messiahs, where all those creepy smiley people were. Hearing some noise, the slimes move towards a building, finally catching up with the two mysterious men. Finally, with a close look, Yuji realizes that the men are wearing capes, a sign that the men are part of the Blue Moon Salvation cult, deducing that the cult most likely are using this abandoned village as their headquarters to forge the red magic crystals. Spotting the supposed head of the village to be named Javier, Yuji overhears that the big machines are called magic wells, responsible for creating these red crystals, but because of his explosion in the forest, he had damaged the machine, which Javier and his men didn't like, assuming that meteors must have unluckily hit their facility. Seeing Javier rally all his men, Javier orders everyone to go fetch the 100+ magic orbs scattered across the forest, revealing that those orbs are needed to make the red crystals. Since Javier's magic well has been destroyed, Javier states that they no longer can stay here, and that his men are permitted to kill anyone that gets in their way. Seeing Javier's men making preparations, Yuji takes the opportunity to have his slimes position themselves around the village, watching to see if the hooded men are leaving. Next, Yuji asks several slimes to search the village, checking to see if the Blue Moon cult members are the only ones in town. Stumbling upon a room filled with books, Yuji has his slimes steal the books, storing them in the slimes. At the same time, Yuji's slimes spot two men attempting to leave the village, binding them with magic spells. But just like the first encounter, the men bite a mysterious poison, killing themselves before the slimes can interrogate them. Having cleaned out the books in front of the room's shelves, the slimes encounter another metal door, but this time there are no levers, instead 5 candles. Getting an idea, Yuji has 5 slime each line up in front of the candles, then they simultaneously blow out the candles, triggering the metal door to open. As the slimes enter the room, they are greeted with hundreds of gold coins, along with various valuable items. Instructed to take the loot as well, the slimes suddenly hear someone coming, hiding, as the person discovers that the book room and their loot room have been cleaned out. Listening in on when Javier hears about his valuable loot being stolen, Javier deduces that they have been discovered and it was not the cause of the meteor, as their valuable loot has been stolen, and the men he sent to scout outside the village are not reporting back. When some of Javier's men wonder why the perpetrator doesn't just kill them all now, Javier states that he has an item called the Cleansing Flame, an item that will activate the moment he and his 4 men die, used to create a massive explosion that'll take out the entire world. Hearing this, Yuji is glad to have not killed the men right there, but suddenly sees Javier and his 4 men take out daggers, killing themselves, as Javier declares that they'll take down the perpetrator with them. Before the cleansing flame can activate, Yuji gathers his slimes, creating a mini barrier around them, only to blast them towards his direction. Next, Yuji erects multiple barriers around the village of Messiahs, watching as the green cleansing flame begins tearing up the homes in the village, smashing against the inside of Yuji's barriers. Knowing that his barriers won't be able to contain the flames, Yuji quickly searches for a stronger barrier spell, but when he doesn't find one, he gets an idea. Seeing the flame, Yuji begins crafting an ice magic that is meant to dispel fire magic. Next, he combines the ice spell with the barrier spell, creating and casting his new cube barrier spell, right before the flames finally burst through his initial barriers. As the flames push out on the walls of his cube barrier, Yuji pumps more and more magical power into his barrier, watching his MP drop lower and lower. Finally, he feels the source of the flame dying out, officially retracting his barrier, spotting a huge hole where the village once was. Returning to Ricardo, Yuji is greeted by the villagers, who were worried that Yuji was in the forests when the 2 massive explosions went off, having assumed that Yuji may have been hit by meteors, making Yuji wonder why people are so concerned about meteors. As good news, the villagers tell Yuji that the snow in town has begun to melt. The next morning, as Yuji wakes up, he's invited to a party, celebrating the end of winter and the constant snowy days. Deemed the guest of honor for all that he's done to help the village, Yuji gives a toast to the village, finally being served the chef's best meat stew dish. Completely stuffing himself with the stew, Yuji takes a quick nap, only to wake up and begin reading through the books and scrolls he stole from the Blue Moon cult. Looking through each one, Yuji is disappointed as the text begins disappearing before reading them, wondering if there was a magic spell cast on them. But luckily, Yuji stumbles upon a singular scroll still intact, with names scribbled on them, which makes him very tense, deducing that the Blue Moon cult intended to hunt these names down. Elsewhere in a castle, we see 2 assassins who have slaughtered everyone in the castle, finding an exact scroll, just like Yuji's, but it's revealed that one of the names on the scroll is Yuji's himself. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like and comment.